All right. Good day after everyone. It's 4 p.m. over there in New York, 10 p.m. over in Europe, and 10 a.m. in Honolulu, Hawaii, 8 a.m. in Auckland, and 6 a.m. in Sydney. Don't ask me why. I know that. But this is the first installment of tea time. Why do I? Yeah, tea time. I got my tea in my hand. It's very unnatural for me to be in front of a camera live with other people that know a lot more than I do. So so I think that's why I'm doing all this. So before I introduce like the whole concept of tea time, everyone that is interested can comment. We're live on both Facebook and as well as YouTube. Sort of my professional Facebook page, Gazali Horilla. You can just drop a line in that one, or you go to YouTube and it's tea time, couch conversation with Gazali, and you can drop a comment. Please do so. And because this is a Q&A, this is like very informal. It's couch talk. It's not a dialogue or something that is very formal. It's just us talking with you, and I think that's like we call it. We're all in social distancing mode right now, but that doesn't mean that we cannot be social. So that's a little bit like what you can do. So tea time is it's mostly about Indigenous peoples, our agenda, our impacts, like how COVID-19 impacts Indigenous peoples, and what I wanted to do when we all went to quarantine or in the lockdown or self-isolation or whatever you want to call it. I wanted to reach out to my Indigenous friends and relatives and colleagues, and I just wanted to figure out like, hey, how are you doing? Are you safe? Are you healthy? And what I saw was that there was a lot of conversation like with me, but not like globally. There were conversations in regions, but not conversations in at a global stage. So props to Freddie Sebastian from Aymara from Chile. He suggested to me that I should like host like global phone calls in terms of to see video calls for Indigenous people to check in with one another and see what we can do, like how we can come out of this quarantine lockdown stronger than we went in. So I had some conversations back and forth and hosted quite a number of them, and like 5 major topics came out of that everyone wanted to dive deeper into. We had like those conversations were like 2 hours, but we ran out of time actually to really go into depth into everything that we wanted to cover. So the next couple of days, so this is installment number 1, episode number 1 of the 5-day saga. Sorry, like I'm still in Star Wars mode. Is today we'll talk about how COVID-19 impacts the international agenda of Indigenous peoples, including UN processes. So there's a big group behind this, and there's only a fraction. We just see on the screen right now is only a fraction of the group that is behind this whole initiative. So we have the pleasure right now I have the pleasure to be in one conversation with Paulo, Sachem Hawk Storm, Rochelle, Rebecka, and Johnson. So there they are all lined up in sorry, Paulo, my logo is now in front of your face. So I think it would be good for everyone because there's a lot of people that are not familiar with all of you. I am familiar with all of you, but I can imagine that a lot of people are not familiar with you. So maybe just give the origin story rundown of who you are, and then we'll go from there. So Paulo, it's up to you, man.
Yeah, I'm Paulo Arantes. I'm Brazilian. I've been working with the UN human rights system for a while now, and in the last years working with indigenous peoples and indigenous rights, I fully fell in love with this topic, and there we are, just to exchange some ideas on that.
Sweet, thanks. Rochelle, thank you. You conquered some storms. That is what I heard. You, I
Hi, bonjour everyone. I mean, yeah, we're getting some late season snowstorms here in northern Minnesota. We've had some hail, rain, snow, really rapidly dropping temperatures. So yeah, we've got a bit of a snowstorm out here. I'll try to give you guys a background in a little bit. It's pretty hard out there. So for all of you who don't know me, Rochelle Diver, I'm Lake Superior Ojibwe from Fond du Lac Reservation in northern Minnesota. Really happy to join the conversation, talk about some international processes, really focusing on UN Environment Program in particular, some of the meetings coming up, and happy to share some ideas. Miigwech.
Sweet. Johnson.
Hello, everyone. This is Johnson Cerda. I'm from Ecuador. I'm Kichwa from the Ecuadorian Amazon. I'm working with Conservation International in a program called the Dedicated Mechanism for Indigenous Peoples and Local Communities. And we are working in 12, we started with 14 countries and working in 14 countries and a global component to work, with those countries. And I'm based in Washington, D.C. for now. And also, dealing with connected with the Climate Change Convention, also expecting some of those meetings because our work is somehow related to that convention as well.
Appreciate it, Johnson. Rebecka, Woodis.
Porek Aikesh. Nice to meet you all. My name is Rebecka Forsgren. I am a Southern Saami, brought up in the Swedish area of our traditional lands. Really nice to meet you all. I am normally I'm based in Geneva in Switzerland, and I work for the World Intellectual Property Organization, which is a UN specialized agency working on intellectual property and traditional knowledge. So I work with and for Indigenous peoples there. But we are currently, the office is closed. So I'm back in Sweden now working remotely. So yeah, we have a bit storm here as well. Very much of an April weather for us. So yeah, good to see you all.
Thank you so much. Hawk, you're the last one. And you're still on mute, man.
I hit the button. So my name is Sachem Hawk Storm. I am Schaghticoke from Turtle Island. I'm on the New York area, upstate New York, and yeah, do a lot of work with different groups at the Permanent Forum on Indigenous Issues, and also doing a lot of work with agro-food forestry, with different indigenous communities, working with the Wabanaki Confederacy, the Yawanala peoples down in Brazil, and in conversations with other groups that are just doing this work using indigenous traditional knowledge. So I'm very grateful to be in this group.
Awesome. And I think it's because we are talking about the effects of COVID-19 on international processes. Like, this is a very good mix of people. Paulo is very intimate with Human Rights Council. Johnson, like, he's like the master when it comes to UNFCCC. Rebecka, like she said, on WIPO. Rochelle, like, ask anything about CBD and the BRS. So that was like Basel, Rotterdam, and Stockholm conventions, and she can talk for ages about that. And Hawk can talk a lot about the Permanent Forum. So let's can we start a little bit about like where they are right now in terms of well, we all know everyone is in lockdown and working from home and everything else, but where did those processes leave? But you know, like before this lockdown was instituted, like where was the Human Rights Council? And because I think that's very interesting to see like what's the stock take, where are we right now? I don't know where to start, but maybe Paula, because you started with introductions, maybe yeah, like can you tell me about a little bit, tell us a little bit about Human Rights Council, where it is right now in terms of processes and everything else?
Yeah, the Human Rights Council started nicely 1 week. So then we had the high-level segment, and all the special rapporteurs, they presented their studies. And then during the second week, we had progressive interruptions now. And then they tried to organize the meetings at the Assembly Hall, which is the largest meeting room in the whole UN in Geneva. So it stopped exactly on the item 9. So it went all the way through. So the main debates were carried out. What was missing was the Durban debate. Every session of the Human Rights Council, there is and this is an opportunity for indigenous peoples to interact with the council, though it's not the most specialized venue. And the resolutions, they were not taken action. So all the 40 and so resolutions that were on the table, they will be resolved somewhere in time that we don't know yet. But the council is still pending. There was an early decision of the president of the council to nominate the 13 special procedure mandates that were pending. So the president decided to anticipate. So that's more or less where we stopped, and then it was permanently suspended.
Yeah, thanks. Because I believe that the special rapporteur on the rights of Indigenous peoples was like on the last minute was elected, right?
Yes.
Francisco Cali.
Yes.
Yeah. Oh,
yes.
So that's good. Well, obviously we'll come back to the Human Rights Council. There's a lot of things happening at the HRC that affects Indigenous peoples. We're supposed to be in New York around this time, actually, for the Permanent Forum, Hawk. Yeah, like how does that feel, not being able to go to the Permanent Forum for the first time in a very long time?
Yeah, it's pretty disturbing, actually. Especially with the way things are going now, with like for us in particular in the U.S., pulling out of the U.S. Human Rights Network out of the International Human Rights Network, and having, being on such shaky ground with the United Nations Declaration on the Rights of Indigenous Peoples, and whether we even push the declaration right now when we have so many leading presidents right now that could pull a few countries right out of our declaration. And at this time is also the time when we can get the most of us at the same table to have these discussions and to be able to prepare for not just the Permanent Forum, but for other meetings that are coming up in the UN and in Geneva. This is a time when we don't have very many times when we can all come together and start brainstorming these processes. Which also brings us to the fact that if it's pushed forward, what's going to be overlapping, and it'll kind of thin out the amount of Indigenous peoples that actually can show up and have a voice during all these processes. So it's pretty disturbing. It's also like very difficult for us, right? Because this is the time when we come together, and you know, most of the time it's a very isolating job that we have. You know, we feel very like in all of our regions, we feel very isolated in our regions, and this is the time when we actually come together and hey, you know, this is why we do this, and this is that we're not alone in this in our individual areas. So
right. Thanks.
It's kind of where I'm feeling right now.
Yeah, it feels strange not to be in New York at the right now. Rochelle, like for me, it was kind of strange because you were in Rome when the virus broke out over there in Italy for a CBD meeting. Like, how did that feel before you go like into like where we are at the chemical conventions and CBD?
We were really surprised. It all happened really quickly once we got there. We were really focused on the work, as you always are before you go to one of these meetings. It was the second session of the open-ended working group for the CBD towards a post-2020 strategic framework. There will be 3 altogether. And so we arrived with our head in the game. We knew this was a really important meeting, working towards the COP that was scheduled for November 2020. A day or 2 after we got there is when Northern Italy went into lockdown. So it was still the weekend. We were still meeting the Indigenous Peoples Caucus, and our other side meetings and preparatory meetings were still happening, but we didn't know what to expect on Monday morning when we went into FAO. So we were all just, continuing to work and playing the waiting game. And once we got into the morning plenary session, we were actually quite surprised how much they were playing it down. Even the WHO was telling us everything is fine. The meeting should still continue because there's a lot of work to be done. It's important to note that these meetings are already very rushed. They were trying to complete 4 more meetings are scheduled throughout the end of 2020. So that's going to get pushed back, which I know we'll cover later. But it just didn't even seem to be an option to cancel. They were saying everything's fine. Just keep social distancing. Make sure we've got a good amount of space in between one another. So if any of you have ever been inside a UN plenary session, you know that is nearly impossible. Actually, the whole room kind of chuckled at that moment as we, we're sitting elbow to elbow. But yeah, we continued on. I didn't hear about anyone getting sick from our meeting. And we just kept pushing through and trying to focus the best we could. The work continued. So we did as well.
Appreciate it. Thank you. Johnson. So how are things like, how are you doing? Well, and like UNFCCC, maybe you could also, because it's like UNFCCC is a very big monster to grasp in one conversation. But could you also give a rundown, because we just came out of COP where are we in agriculture, like Coronovia process and Article 6 maybe, if you would able to give a brief rundown as well.
Yeah, let's see. First of all, the Paris Agreement was adopted in 2015, right? And during the next 3 years until 2018, they're supposed to work on the rules for the implementation of the Paris Agreement, but still the Article 6 is missing there. So that's, we are aware of that. And in terms of the implementation of the Paris Agreement starts this year, but that part is missing, the Article 6. But in terms of the Indigenous Peoples Platform, we have already worked on the composition of the facilitative working group with 7 members from Indigenous Peoples, and then the work plan was adopted last year, and the priorities of that work plan there were only 5, I think, activities. 4 activities of mapping, only mapping participation, mapping of funding, mapping of policies, and then just 1 activity on exchanges, I think regional exchanges, but that is not clear yet because we don't have any other information. These 5 priorities were decided there, but it's not public. I haven't seen in their website, but that is the priority they have from the 12 activities that they have as, activities of the work plan. That's one thing. And then in terms of agriculture, we were invited to participate in that activity that was for April, was canceled as well. And I don't know when they are going to reschedule that meeting on agriculture. Basically, as maybe you are aware of this, they have decided the work plan for the agriculture, and they are organizing workshops where with different topics. And as Indigenous peoples, we are invited to submit our ideas or inputs on the topics they are dealing with. So that's why we were invited this time, but I don't know when they are going to reschedule. What we understand at this point is that also the SABSTA meeting supposed to have in June. Now it's postponed for October, right? October 4 to 12. And then the COP also for the next year, I believe. It's not for this year. So that is the situation there. We are expecting to have more information. At this point, the Secretariat, I think, is still expecting the submission on the participation of Indigenous peoples on international climate change or other bodies, it says. One is in participation, the other one is in policies, and the third one is in the participation, but related to NDCs at the national level, how Indigenous peoples are going to participate in the reporting process of the NDCs. So they are expecting that. Still, the deadlines, I think, for 2 submissions is this at the end of this month, and the third one on NDCs is for June, mid-June, I believe. So we are expecting that, and yeah, no more information there. We are still waiting for more information.
Yeah, I appreciate it, Johnson. Rebecka, how are things over at WIPO?
Yes, how are things? Yeah, same here. Like, we're facilitating meetings as well. We're facilitating the IGCs, or the Intergovernmental Committee on Genetic Resources, Traditional Knowledge and Folklore, which is traditional cultural expressions. And we were supposed to have quite a few meetings this year. Schedule has, of course, changed. Everything is still tentative. All the new all the new dates, still we don't know. So it's very, like, for everyone, it's very strange to be. We have these international meetings that we go to, and which we usually coordinate with, and we have our own meetings as well, and we have our workshops and our capacity building activities and so on. So yeah, it was a very, like, schedule-wise, a very packed spring until recently. But it is strange. I mean, we talked about this as well, Ghazali, that when these new dates, we were looking at, like, possible new dates. It's really hard to plan, of course, but well, we're just hoping that we will get some sort of answers to go. Yeah. So I mean, we're still planning as if things will work out pretty soon. Trying to get everything ready that we can, so when we're ready to go again and to, like, start having our meetings and have our different activities, like, we're ready to go pretty much. So yeah, that's the situation. That's the situation for us now.
All right. Thanks for the update. For me, like, might as well give an update as well. In terms of the BBNJ process, so which is the biodiversity beyond national jurisdiction. So which is a new legally binding treaty to protect the biodiversity of the high seas. So if 70% of the planet is oceans, 64% of that are the high seas. And so under the UNCLOS right now, so the UN Convention on the Law of the Sea, they now want to create a legally binding treaty to protect the biodiversity. So it started was the whole process started in 2012 at the Rio Summit, Rio +20. And they have been working hard towards getting to the final legally binding document. The interest of indigenous peoples in this whole legally binding treaty is that they want to there are a lot of states, but mostly the Pacific Small Island developing states and the classic states that are supportive of indigenous peoples and the rights of indigenous peoples and human rights. They wanted to have, in terms of reference, that they're not only looking at science to protect the biodiversity, but also look at the knowledge of indigenous peoples to protect the biodiversity. So creating at least that is my vantage point, that creating equity and equality between the two, making sure that when we look at protecting the biodiversity, that we're not solely looking at science and regards the knowledge of indigenous peoples, or what they would like to call, and I would love to hear your thoughts about that as well, what everyone else likes to call traditional knowledge, as a orphan that nobody wants to talk to. And that is, I think the idea is to bring balance to those, that both are considered to protect the biodiversity. So they're looking at a clearinghouse mechanism, like a SUBSTA, which is made, what we know at UNFCCC, but at UNFCCC is a little bit politicized, like the SUBSTA. Under the BBNJ, we're looking at having a SUBSTA of experts, both indigenous as well as scientists. So why I'm saying this is because we're supposed to be in the final round of negotiations in New York last week, and we were all geared towards towards making sure that we now have a legally binding treaty. And before I went into quarantine, I was in Monaco. There was an informal session hosted by Prince Albert II of Monaco Foundation, and His Serene Highness himself was in that meeting as well, and former Secretary of State John Kerry, which was odd, but it's at least to sit across from a table from a former Secretary of State. And it was a very good meeting. And then we heard, of course, that all the meetings in New York were going to be postponed, and that the final round of negotiations were also going to be postponed. And the difficulty with this process is it requires a new resolution from the General Assembly. So we have to go through that process again, and hoping that we can finalize this whole process soon. And yeah, so, and then I went back, and then we received the news that His Serene Highness Prince Albert was also infected by the virus, and we just shook hands and sat across from each other a couple of days ago. So we were all a little bit scared, but as far as I know, everyone is healthy and is safe, and I think His Serene Highness is doing well by himself as well. So that is in terms of when it comes to the oceans. There's something, there's a lot more things going on, of course, a lot more processes. We talk about FAO or IFAD, but if we're going to talk about that, it will probably be another couple hours of talking that we probably shouldn't do. I just wanted to open up the floor. First of all, I'm not a chair or chairperson, or I don't have a gavel, and nor do I want to use a gavel. Just it's a conversation, and speak freely, share your thoughts. And first, how are we, like, maybe throw in an idea in there, or like a discussion point. How are we feeling with the response of, I'm not talking about the WHO, but the UN in general, in terms of handling this pandemic? Anyone? Yeah, just Paulo, go ahead, man.
Yeah, just shoot first. Yeah, so the official physical contact meetings, they are, of course, clearly suspended, but the treaty bodies as well. So the 10 treaty bodies, they decide not to hold official meetings for obvious reasons, but they're handling some priority information. For example, they were adopting list of issues of many countries. So there is some work going on. Now, regarding the special procedures, there's lots going on. I mean, they're able to process urgent appeals or letters of allegations. Of course, there is country visits. They have been suspended, but the staff has been working. So we've been able to make a number of WhatsApp or Skype calls to work on future reports. If you subscribe to the UN civil society, OHCHR civil society mailing list, you see that the thematic studies are going on. So there are many deadlines for contribution, not only on the rapporteurship on indigenous peoples, but many of them. So there are many ways in which we can still interact with the UN human rights system. There is a very good opportunity. It's a mid and long-term process, but the special rapporteur on human rights and the environment has invited states to adopt a resolution to consider the healthy environment as a human right. Internationally, it hasn't been recognized yet. Probably Johnson knows much more, but at least from Latin America, many constitutions adopt a human right, a balanced environment as a human right. So there's an opportunity not only to support this idea, but to emphasize the role of indigenous peoples in preserving the environment, to strengthen SDG language. I mean, we haven't seen much, for example, many elaboration on the issue of agents of change, so that indigenous peoples, without them, countries will not achieve the SDG. So something that came out, now I was thinking aloud, came out. I leave now for someone else who has some more ideas.
Yeah, I can jump in. Or do you want to talk, Johnson? You can respond if you want to. No, same for us. Like I said, things are postponed and so on. And I think, we're trying to find new ways of keeping some sort of activities going, keeping engagement, finding new platforms in which we can communicate, and what we should be communicating about. And I think that's something that we're working on. Like, what kind of needs are there now? Like, what does indigenous peoples need and want now? And that's really something that I was hoping to get input on. And the traditional knowledge division, where I work, that we have been discussing a lot, because we're obviously we're not out there. We're not with Indigenous peoples, and just like speaking freely here is that I'm sure that a lot of Indigenous peoples, like they are really suffering with this virus, and then there are also Indigenous peoples who might not be like so affected like physically themselves, or maybe be in danger, but who are still in lockdown. What kind of new needs are there now? So that's what we're trying to map, and I would really like to hear your input. What should we be doing? Because like what we do a lot of capacity building activities, and we're thinking like, do we continue to do that? Do we find do we use this time to find new platforms to reach people? Is it really a good time to do that? Do people want that right now? Do people have time? Do they have the capability to like get that information in, or is it too stressful? So those questions we're really throwing around, and we're trying to find answers. Like how can we help in this situation? What are the needs of Indigenous peoples who are in different situations right now? So, yep.
Okay, this is Johnson. In our side, I haven't seen much, things going on. We don't have any meetings, but I would say that we don't have also information. Things are not moving in my view. But we understand the situation. It's perhaps easy for us to have access to the internet, but I see that in the community side, we don't have much possibilities to have access to the internet and keep, having the conversation or keep moving things. That is one of the barriers that we have. And I've seen that many of the Indigenous leaders, they are focused on how they are going to protect the communities and coordinating with different institutions to see if communities are safe. So they are focused on that. And just now, we are trying to do something and engage with them in terms of starting the conversation. But the last one is what, like, they were totally locked down, and even with communication was impossible. So exploring opportunities now, since we have this kind of platforms. I started just last week, using a platform like this.
And how's the reception, by the way, Johnson? Like, how do people receive in your region that using that new platform? Sorry to interrupt.
No. They like a lot this because in rural communities, they don't have internet to, in their laptop, in their house. They have, the cell phone, and they can see Facebook. And if we share through Facebook things, they can have access to the information. But in terms to see them and work, they don't have possibilities to do that. It's just a phone, and they are using just to, see activities like this. So they are happy with this, and they have requested to do more. We are so far doing like 2 Facebook using this platform, and we are sharing information with communities and inviting people to speak, and it's greatly appreciated by our community members. So I'm happy with this, and I'm happy also that you guys are starting with this, and that will help a lot to our colleagues to understand what's going on out there. We know that nothing is moving, but perhaps it's moving slowly, but it's important to share this information with them.
Well, my question is also, but not necessarily to you, Johnson, but like you said, like nothing is moving. But I have a feeling that like there are things moving. Like the UN is still working, right? So and here comes actually what a fear of mine is that the UN is still moving, the international community is still moving, while everyone is in lockdown, and everyone is so focused on like staying alive and trying to not be infected. How can we as a movement, as Indigenous peoples, as well as Indigenous allies, like be able to still engage with like Rebecka said, like how can we still engage with the UN, even though we're still in lockdown, even though we're in this confined space in our own bubble. So just maybe not necessarily a question, but more like a comment or like a concern that I have. I don't know if everyone else shares that concern. I just wanted to throw it out there though.
Yeah, I'd like to comment on that. There's, going back to what Rebecka was saying about what Indigenous communities need now, and I think they're both tied in with all of these meetings still happening. There are meetings still happening without an Indigenous voice present, and it's been hard enough to get an Indigenous voice in many of these meetings in the first place. So seeing what their agendas are that they're pushing forward. Like, first of all, here in the US, the president just rolled back all EPA. And so they're to push, of course, their agenda through the pipelines and stuff like that. They also are starting to take away reservation lands. And so like we have the Mashpee Wampanoag who are being threatened to lose their reservation status here on the East Coast. These are things that we would be able to address at the Permanent Forum, to the Special Rapporteur, to get a a human rights violation assessment that we're not able to get. And down in Brazil, what's happening is the president is now we have an indigenous tribes that have the COVID-19 inside the jungle, right? And so if some of these tribes are 8 hours upriver in the jungle, and to even get to a local town, you're talking 8 hours, and then to get to a hospital that actually could treat these people, you could be 5 more hours away, and so these are serious issues that we're dealing with right now, and we have presidents in these countries in particular that want to blame it on Indigenous peoples, or they're okay with the Indigenous peoples being wiped out from something like this, so to further push their agenda of deforestation and mining. So these are I think the human rights issues that we'd be able to address on a more physical level that we can't right now is pretty devastating.
Yeah, and just to add to that, it's really important to watch these countries that are openly criticizing WHO and United Nations processes, like we're seeing in the United States and Brazil. They're really taking this as an opportune moment to push their agenda. And also in Canada, we're seeing the same things. We're seeing changes of regulations around the tar sands in Alberta. In the United States, individual states are changing laws, 3 in particular, since COVID has hit our communities. They have taken this opportunity to criminalize any gatherings that will be considered protests, all along the lines of what will be if they push it through the KXL pipeline. So we're trying to protect our communities. We're trying to protect ourselves. At the same time, we're under attack. And with limited resources to keep our people healthy, let alone begin to stage organized fights against these threats. So there's more governments to keep an eye on in that realm as well.
Yeah, just a few words on Brazil. So President Bolsonaro has been denying the seriousness of COVID, for a long time. And this is added to his campaign really to get rid of all indigenous peoples. I mean, since day one. So the effects are of this, those combined policies is like lack of any humanitarian aid. So many indigenous communities, they are, lacking everything: food, medical care, and so on. There are also reports that religious missionaries took the opportunity to start visiting non-contacted peoples. There's been also an attempt to evict a quilombola. It's a traditional community in the state of Maranhão, just because media is distracted with the COVID-19, so they are trying to do that. So all the effects that the overall population suffers, we see the indigenous people suffering it very disproportionately, and for the overall population, COVID-19 hasn't reached its peak. So the results in the few weeks will be really disastrous. We're bracing for something really, really bad.
I heard, I had a conversation with Carson Kibuto from Kenya, and he said also that the states or police in this matter are using the lockdown measure as a way of like shooting at indigenous peoples. That there are indigenous peoples are killed. There are more indigenous peoples killed by the police in these times than by COVID-19. So like you see everywhere, like a surge of like you guys said, that they're using this as an excuse to like crack down on indigenous peoples, which is, or no, not just states, but like everyone else. And I'm also concerned about. I heard something somewhere that companies were now allowed to dump chemicals in waters now, because there's a lot of legislation. I can't remember which country that was, but they were now allowed to like dump chemicals in waters. Like there was legislation that was put in place to fight climate change, but like no, they're not backtracking legislation. That particular legislation. So my fear is not just indigenous peoples, but like the world in general will come out of this in a worse state than we went into this whole shithole. And also, so yeah, I'm really looking forward to like hearing your thoughts or whatever else we want to chuck in there. Also, there's people like watching. There's almost 50 people, not a lot more than 50 people watching this live stream, and you're able to comment and or ask questions to everyone on the stream, and we will definitely and you can, for example, there's a greeting for Paulo. So so I can do that. So I can bring in people and questions that people are asking. So please, if you're watching this or consuming in any other way, or from Facebook or YouTube, please don't hesitate to comment in or drop your 2 cents into this whole conversation. May
I say something?
Yes, Johnson.
Yeah, in a positive note, in the communities in Ecuador, since most of the members of the village, they have decided to go into the forest itself. Most of the people from the cities, they are asking them if they can receive them in the forest. So we've been talking with our colleagues there that, this is an opportunity to say that, we are protecting the forest and cares for everyone. And they have to support also our struggle, because that is the issue that we are having there, Our colleagues in the south of the Ecuadorian Amazon against the mining companies, in the north against the oil companies, And just now, when we have this situation, we are spending our time in the forest as community members, and most of the people, as I said, they want to come there. So it's actually, I think it's also a great opportunity to tell everybody that, you know, that is why we are protecting the forest. Just wanted to say that.
I have someone that, well, this whole feature of this whole platform can only host 6. So I'm going to jump out for a couple of for a moment, going to bring Victor in, like he was on the stream as well. So I'm gonna.
Can you hear me? Nice. Yeah, it's really nice to be here with everyone. I think there's not much I can say that already hasn't been said. I think this is a time that we really need to be vigilant of government and companies using this as an excuse just to take advantage of us and take advantage of all the progress that we've made. So thank you everyone for fighting and for, you know, keeping your eye on these things when our communities are facing, you know, what they would deem to be distractions, but we won't take our eye off the board, off the chessboard, and let them, you know, do what they've always tried to do. And I think this is a classic example of what these countries do during vulnerable times. They go into communities, they might offer assistance, but it doesn't come without clauses. It doesn't come without, you know, without misunderstandings that are propagated intentionally. And I think during this time, yeah, we really need to focus on these processes and make sure that we're there at each one, because like Ghazali said, things happen really quickly. Yeah, just from the medical perspective, because I'm an Indigenous medical student at Harvard Medical School, I think it's there's a balancing act that Indigenous communities have to participate in right now in terms of dealing with, you know, the Western systems, the Western medical systems, and how to go about that is something that I've been thinking about a lot, because a lot of Indigenous communities don't trust Western medicine. And so how do we implement our action plans in a way that, you know, protects our communities, you know, and maintains the rights that a lot of our elders have fought so hard for, but at the same time is led by us and not by these savior mentality type organizations and medical institutions and Western governments that might try to take advantage of our vulnerability right now. So one thing I'm doing is leading a team with some of my fellow Indigenous youth, like Carson, who Ghazali was mentioning earlier, and Harvard Medical School, and with the UN Youth Envoy. And we got a team of about 20 Harvard Medical doctors and health professionals who are being led by Indigenous youth on helping, you know, communities respond to this crisis on their own terms, and being able to have an empowering partnership with one of the premier medical institutions in the world. And I would appreciate if anyone would like to work with us on this, please feel welcome to join us. We're also partnering with International Fund for Agricultural Development, and we're maintaining an eye on these processes, and going to move towards partnership with the World Health Organization as well. And would appreciate anyone with expertise on those processes who might be able to help us move forward, and developing something that probably would have been helpful if we already had it in place. But this isn't the last time this is going to happen. These pandemics have been happening already for a long time, and they're going to happen in the future. And we need to figure out also the long-term game in terms of how we move forward and prepare, because this isn't something that's going to be a one-time thing. So I think it'd be good to keep an eye on how we build from here. Thank you.
Sorry, again, Victor, there's only like 6 that can go in, and so I had to jump out myself. But thank you for your comments, and yeah, I'd like to ask repeat that question, like how do we deal with this long term? Because this probably won't be the first one and not be the last one. How can we deal with this as a movement to staying active, and how do we deal with this?
So, Rochelle, did you want to speak, or is it okay? Yeah, thank you. I might be jumping the gun now also, but I don't think we're there. But so I'm hearing the conversation, and also thank you, Victor. It's super cool. I don't know anything about. I'm gonna say anything about medicine, which kind of tells you how little I know. But it's really great that so many Indigenous peoples have that interest and knowledge come together now. We have a Saami nurse that I was hanging out with earlier today. It's really important to have these Indigenous people who are in medicine in different forms. But then I was thinking, so listening to your conversation here, it's we already had issues before. We have our issues as Indigenous peoples, and now there might even be new issues coming out in addition to this threat of COVID-19, and the fear is that the UN processes is gonna continue, and that Indigenous peoples are gonna be left behind, and be left behind, not be involved, and that even though we have fought for that place for so long, so that's a question I wanted to ask you, and also maybe people who can comment on the chat. Do you want to wait? Do we want to wait until we have these physical meetings again, so we can raise these issues with the permanent forum and so on, or do we try to find ways in between on how to keep active? Do we find new ways, and how do we go on with that? Because again, like we all said, everything is tentative. We're looking at October, looking at November. Some meetings have even been postponed until next year. So yeah. So do we wait for those meetings, or what do we do? What do we do in the meantime? Again, maybe we're not quite there yet, because people are still really much in a crisis and might not even have reached the peak of their crisis. But it's still something that we should consider, I think.
Absolutely, I agree. Thank you, Rebecka. If you don't mind if I chime in again, I'm actually going to have to jump off for another call. So I'm just going to finish with a couple things to add on what Rebecka is saying. I think that we really found ourselves with a silver lining here with all the organizing that we've been doing on Zoom and other platforms. It's something that we were kind of lacking otherwise. We just look forward to seeing each other at the meetings, having our regional and global caucus meetings and engaging that way, when actually these really should have been happening before any UN process that we went to. We can't always make it to Geneva or Bonn or wherever these meetings are happening. And we end up sometimes, doing our best as a very small group to ensure that voices of Indigenous peoples are heard globally. And I think this is really highlighting a gap that we had before, and it's something that we can do before any UN process to make sure everybody's voice is amplified and that we have input from everybody and are able to, touch bases with all corners of the world and ensure that we really are showing up at these meetings with a representative focus. So that's one thing that I just wanted to say, and I hope that we can do that. We could even have one of these for each one of the UN processes that are coming up that are scheduled to happen, so that people that work in these fields can provide their input, even if they've never been to a UN meeting before at all. So that said, just quickly wanted to talk about the UN environment meetings that are set to happen. Like I said earlier, the 3 CBD meetings were set to the SBSTA, the scientific body, the final session of the open-ended working group for the strategic post-2020 strategic framework, and then the COP. Also, UN Environment Assembly was set to meet. The UN Minamata Convention on Mercury was set to meet next year as well. And of course, UNFCCC. And then the Stockholm Convention on Persistent Organic Pollutants, the Basel and Rotterdam Conventions, they meet as a super COP. So these are all now set to happen in 2021. And I just thought that, thank you, Gazali, for mentioning the environmental toxic dumping. So just quickly, I'd like to plug and make a call for participation in the UN Stockholm, Basel, and Rotterdam Conventions. Harmful pesticides, other environmental toxics. It has to do with the manufacture and use of, as well as the storage and transnational boundary movement of these harmful toxics. We have, most of them happen in Geneva. We've had a difficult time increasing Indigenous participation. So I just want to let everybody know that these mechanisms exist. If you're having issues with environmental toxics within your communities, any kind of dumping. I just read that in Chicago, there was an explosion from a coal fired power plant or something that basically shed toxics all over a community. We're already fighting COVID with respiratory issues, and they're being inundated with environmental toxics. If any of these things are happening in your community, take note of it. Write down everything that you can that tells where it came from, what's happening, what kind of impacts you're having, and this can be used for future work, and this stuff is going to need to come out later. So just on that note, I'm going to say goodbye to everybody. I want to say thank you for having this opportunity to speak. And please, in the comments, if you want any more information on any of the processes that I've mentioned, I'm so happy to help. And I'll put my email there so people can reach out individually. And so just chimigwich to everyone. Best of luck. I'm going to jump off and create a space for someone else to jump in. So.
Appreciate it, Rochelle. Thank you for your input, and definitely we're gonna we'll talk more during the week, definitely, and we'll talk more about the chemical conventions and everything that's on your mind, because I love your mind, so that's good. Thank you so much, Rochelle, and yeah, you can go now. Yeah, how do we move on from here? It is. Oh, definitely, we're gonna bring in Victor. Yeah, let's what I've at least I move a lot within the Pacific Indigenous region in terms of deal with a lot with the Pacific, and one of my observations was that we work too much with, for example, emails, simple things like that. Whereas why aren't we using platforms like Zoom, like StreamYard, or simple things like using Slack, or all these platforms that are out there, to organize a little bit more. I think that is something that should be using a lot more as well. Paulo, you want to jump in? No, go ahead. Yeah.
Okay. Yeah. I was just listening to Rebecka, what she told. I think whatever we can do while the physical meetings aren't possible, I think we should do. I think within the UN system, there was a sort of a briefing from the High Commissioner on general human rights issues and COVID-19. Only a few mentions about indigenous peoples, really as Rebecka told, left behind. I think the same with the Inter-American Commission on Human Rights. They just published a report on that. If we could help as much as possible at this stage to bring indigenous people's voices to these venues, I think on a first stage to collect information in which specific manners, not only the pandemics, but violations that because governments take advantage of that, and to compile a document or compile something that won't be perfect, but it will be the best possible way to do it, and bring it to the Rapporteur Indigenous Peoples, bring it to the High Commissioner, to the Inter-American Commission on Human Rights, to give a first message. Hey, this is how the COVID, not only the biological phenomenon, but the social phenomenon, how private actors and government take advantage of that, so in general, how it is affecting us. I think that we can do via many digital tools. I mean, via, for example, collect information by simple forms. The Swiss Indigenous Network has done that already. I think if we organize, our work a bit more, we can come up, in this period and say, hey, this is the message of indigenous peoples. Just something I was thinking and jumped into.
Johnson.
Yeah. Are you okay?
Yep.
All right. Just want to say that, we need to get ready, prepare in advance for the meetings coming up later. But one of the challenges that we have, we see, is that the language. In the work we do, with DJM, we have people from Asia, Africa, and Latin America. So we have to translate to 4 languages. And we're organizing our first steering committee meeting in the next month. And the language is one of the challenges, and we are exploring the platforms to do that. And it's becoming a little bit expensive. But, we will see. It's a new reality that we have in order to get ready and continue moving things forward. So that's why I want to share that, that's one of the challenges that we have. But anyway, we should. For instance, just now, we are talking in English. We are, we are leaving out all the colleagues from Latin America that they are also participating in international meetings because they don't speak the language. So that's one of the challenges that we have, and we should explore also how to include all of them as well. Well, I have to leave also, Gasali. Sorry for that. Yeah, my wife is calling now and have to go.
No, appreciate it.
I just wanted to add to that, Johnson. I think that's something that we can talk to, like Michaela, about with Microsoft. We have this platform where we can put on a live movie, and it can translate underneath it instantly with closed captioning. So I'm pretty sure that we can figure out platforms that can do that. And we do seem to know a lot of people collectively that work on internet platforms such as Michaela Jade. But that is definitely something that I've thought about too. We can't be leaving our people out. And as we were making these conversations, I was thinking, it's all well and good to put a statement to the floor, but when it's just including 90% of our population, then it's really not any more helpful than them doing it for us. So yeah, I totally agree with that. But I do think that there's got to be ways that we already have access to this.
Mm-hmm. No, I appreciate it, Johnson, and have a good meeting after this. Paulo, like what you said was something that came up in my head was that shoot, now I lost it. I have a tendency to lose my train of thought when I'm excited. Oh yeah, like it feels like, and correct me if I'm wrong, because you're closer to the source. It feels like that all these international processes, Human Rights Council, special. And I always teach, let train like new producers in a different form. Always check your mic, and now I'm not checking my mic, so that sucks. That's gonna stick. So what I was trying to say was, and in terms of what you just said, I would say Paulo, and correct me if I'm wrong, or like maybe you're closer to the source when it comes to Human Rights Council and special procedures. That it feels like if you read all these statements that they're putting out, Human Rights Council, so like you said, Office of High Commissioner, MRIP did one, the Special Rapporteur on Environment, and they all try to find some kind of a platform, and it's not a platform, but what is the new benchmark? And so like, how can, in this new scenario of COVID-19, how do you apply human rights? How do you apply the rights of Indigenous peoples? And in that, and in uncertainty, because there's no standard, because some include Indigenous peoples and some don't include Indigenous peoples. And I think, is it something, and I'm just asking not just with Paula, but everyone else in this conversation, like, is it something that we have to do, like step up right now and say like, hey, this is how you should include Indigenous peoples without going into like dependency language, like you just said, Victor. So this is just my thoughts when it comes to what you just said, Paulo. Thank you for that, and Johnson as well.
Yeah, this is exactly what I had in mind. But maybe you guys have, I mean, better ideas. I think, I mean, you've been, you know, I have very much, as a non-Indigenous, I have so much respect and working with Indigenous peoples, because you've been resisting for centuries. And the virus is someone you've been braving for a century. So just my word of respect. And I think my token of idea will be like that. In if Indigenous peoples don't jump in the process now, you know, there will be, I mean, there will be no voice heard.
So yeah, my fear is correct. Victor, in terms of like you were the first one, at least in the conversation that we had like last Saturday, about like dependency language. Like, so like what's that line? Like when you talk about like including these peoples in these statements or in national measures to fight COVID-19, because there's a lot of statements that I read it leads towards the dependency language. So look, please, can you first explain what you mean with dependency language and then answer the question?
Yeah, what I mean by dependency is that, like historically, a lot of governments, in order to put put communities in the position that's advantageous to the government, they relied on implementing policies that would make them dependent. They tried to, you know, remove our self-sufficiency, and then once they do that, they, you know, conveniently forget, and now they switch the language to saying like, oh, these communities are vulnerable. These communities need our help. These communities will like die without us, which has been said about like Navajo Nation. Like the governor said, oh, Navajo Nation is going to get wiped out if we don't do something. And, you know, language like that without talking about why we're in this position in the first place, I think is really dangerous, because it paints us as people who are just dependent in our very nature, in the essence of our being, without recognition that you know, why we got here, why we're here, and the fact that, you know, we're not actually dependent. But in the US, I think it needs to be framed, and this is going to be different for each country, but here we have treaties And I know that a lot of tribes don't have treaties, and a lot of tribes aren't even recognized. But speaking strictly, like for the ones that do, framing it not as like aid, not as something that like, you know, a favor, but framing it as a responsibility that the government must take as an action between, you know, based on these treaties that were between sovereign nations. So I think a lot of tribes are trying to do that, and in terms of our healthcare, education, and stuff, framing these things as things that that have to be used to build our sovereignty and not to entrench us in being dependent. And, you know, keeping that end goal that, you know, if we receive money, if we receive healthcare, it's not something that we want to be receiving forever necessarily, but it's something that is owed to us because of the injustices that were done to us, but not something also that we that's the only thing we can rely on. We need to be able to hold multiple truths at the same time. That just because we get, you know, help doesn't mean that we can't also help ourselves at the same time and work towards a way from not needing that help in the future. So I think these are like mind frames that we need to adopt, and because I think in the U.S. and a lot of other places, people do see Indigenous peoples as dependent, like, oh, they're just like leeches on the system, essentially. But, you know, in reality, the system was a leech on us. And we have our practices, we have our sustainable ways that we need to be spreading at the same time during all this as well. And then, yeah, and making sure that we're utilizing all of our resources. I think one of the things that's really effective during these times is making sure we have like a coordinated media response for things that are happening, that are unfolding during this crisis. Being able to take stories of communities that are being disenfranchised during this crisis and putting that out to the world, making sure we're keeping that pressure and making sure people are aware of these things. And so that way we have something to reference and something to advocate off of. I think that's been really effective. And then also just maintaining communication with each other and yeah, building our sovereignty. But yeah, one of the things that that I'm curious about is yeah, also like what we can do now in this within these world frameworks, like within the UN. Like I know we have to learn our traditional knowledge. That's very clear. We need to support our communities and stuff. But yeah, how do we become active in these processes that seem to be kind of disorganized now, and in the know for when they're going to happen, and so that we can sit at those tables. That's something that I'm not really privy to. Maybe someone else knows how. Maybe a strategy on how we can get in those discussions, because I think they're going to roll out really quickly, and a lot of people are going to take advantage of this chaos. Yeah.
Hawk, I saw you nodding first. After that was Paulo. So like, Hawk, you go first.
Well, I totally agree with you. I also think that in our own communities, we need to there's some of us that are starting to try to figure out ways that we can be partnering up with our Indigenous communities on a more sustainable level. You know, working with building, you know, I'd hate to say, I don't want to say like treaties but like unified agreements to be able to create a more Indigenous shared systems of support. You know, there's groups that are like I had mentioned in the beginning that about doing the agro-food forestry or bringing back these cultural significant things like reforming life plans and being able to work together when these governments that are supposedly protecting us fail. And you know, the problem that we have is, like, especially in the U.S., that the reservations are very isolated and cut off. So all of our resources generally come from the outside of the reservation. So if the outside of the reservation has failed, such as we're seeing now, it's harder to get supplies into the reservations to support our people. And how can we come up with solutions to be able to help each other during these times when, you know, we have a government that's going to argue over whether they should even give the tribes a stimulus package when we're subject to their failure. So I think working towards, I think it's a good indicator that their capitalistic system doesn't work. And if it can collapse within the matter of a week, we need to make sure that we have systems in place to protect ourselves from them. Even though we are kind of landlocked, right? But if we have these systems in place, we'll be better prepared to be able to help each other during these times. You know, I think, like you said, you know, we are subject to needing some kinds of support from their system, but also that we don't want to be latched onto their systems for forever. We want to be able to regain our self-sustaining practices, which have been taken from us, you know. And so I think forming these coalitions or these groups of tribes working together can help each group be able to become more self-sustaining and protected during these times. Of course, there's going to be issues that are still going to affect us no matter what. The fact that water comes from the outside into the reservations, the fact that they poison our water. I think we should also work towards like coming up with ways of explaining to people that instead of saying, you know, water is life, but actually explain to people that if they're convinced that water is just H2O, that they can still poison the water, and really explain why water is life. You know, because I think that people have been so separated and removed from the real understanding of their connection to the planet that they don't understand where we're coming from when we say stuff like that. You know, I think re-indigenizing our way of speaking with people, and instead of trying to fit into the framework of the United Nations, maybe they should fit into our framework a little more, and stay more aligned with our traditional knowledge in that way too, just the way that we explain things. We're not them, you know, so we have a different way of doing things and explaining things. And I think that right now we're in a time of great change, and that people are ready to listen to certain things that we have to say, you know.
Is that something that we, at this point, as Indigenous peoples, is it the right time to ask that from UN agencies, UN mechanisms, to more include Indigenous peoples, have more respect for traditional knowledge or ways of knowing, ways of doing? Is it not? Is this the time to do it? And if so, how do we do it?
Well, personally, I think that we don't have any choice. I think that we've come to a point on this planet where we can't beat around the bush anymore. I think that the way that, you know, we're living on this planet, and the fact that people could be out of work for 1 week and the whole economy collapses, shows very much that the way that we're living on this planet is not sustainable at all. You know, and as we talk about our prophecies, as we talk about our stories all coming together right now, you know, Indigenous peoples all over the world have stories about these times that we're in right now, you know, and we have a responsibility an inherent responsibility to our Earth Mother to tell the truth about what's happening and in the way that we know, you know. And so I think that's there's never been a better time for this right now. You know, we've never been in a closer time of gigantic change than right now. We have the whole world not working. We have the whole world on pause. Like, when is there a better opportunity to make a dramatic change for unity on this planet? And you know, the skies in India have cleared. You know, you can see the skies in India. When was the last time we had that? You know, this is a very real situation that we're in.
Appreciate it.
Go ahead.
Go ahead.
Yeah, and I mean, obviously acknowledging that there are so many difficulties coming with the situation, like not just seeing like, oh, what kind of possibilities do we have, but it is in this time we need to meet each other. And because we don't have the opportunity to, like for us, for example, we don't have the opportunity to say, come to our IGC at WIPO, and we're here, and then we have the Indigenous Caucus meeting the days before, and kind of relying on that platform. We need to find new platforms. Yeah, there's still a lot of question marks. There will be for a few weeks, at least a few weeks more, to see how we can solve these things. Like Paulo said as well, like we'll gather information and we'll bring that forward. But then my question is, like, how do we bring that forward to this UN mechanisms? Because bringing it forward means going to the meetings, the physical meetings in New York, in Geneva, and so on. So on that question, like, is this the right time to bring our questions in this new format? Well, this is a new format. We need to meet each other in a new way now. It will just be very interesting to see in which ways this will be. But it's obvious that we need to find new ways, because when I ask, like, do we wait for the physical meetings, I see everyone's head go, no, like we can't wait around for that. So it will be interesting and a bit scary to see, like, how do we move forward from this? What kind of mechanisms will we have? What kind of in which kind of format and platform will we meet? What kind of new needs will Indigenous peoples have during and after the COVID-19? So, and kind of find a way well to meet during this time. So now it will be interesting to see, not just positively interesting, but it will be interesting to see how we solve this, how we go through with this.
Mm-hmm. Thanks. Paulo?
Yeah, just picking up from anyone I was listening to. I mean, Victor was talking about a strategy. I don't think there is sort of a golden or the best strategy. There is sort of a way forward that, you know, some people know more about, you know, some technical issues on how to reach an international venue and so on. Added, you know, combined with the essence of your, you know, plight and your suggestions. I mean, I think there is a sort of a way forward in that. No, yes, and I think time is ripe and probably almost too late, at least for a preliminary message from Indigenous peoples. I can say only from the you know, my experience with the UN special procedures. They are working, and the rapporteur is available. There are creative ways, you know, of finding simple solutions with meeting with, you know, a small meeting with 20 persons, with some draftings, for example, a first assessment, from the indigenous people, how the COVID is affecting them, obviously on the right to health, on freedom of assembly, on hate speech. Has it increased? By which means, indigenous peoples, and so on and so on and so on. I think that there is a possibility that this would impact positively, because we will bring and sort of authoritative, it's something that the essence will come from you, indigenous peoples, working, and the ones who cannot, the ones who have internet access, they can try to sort of capillarize into, within the colleagues who are unable to be there with the best internet connection, but they send some voice messages through WhatsApp and so on. There are ways, in which we can feed the UN system right now. Maybe not with the best methodologies, but with the best of our efforts and hearts.
Yeah, I agree. I think the worst thing that you can do right now is sit at home and do nothing, and especially when things are happening, things are progressing in a fast way, and in a way that's because we're all in our bubble, right? So we don't, because we call it social distancing, and we're all inside, isolated in our own bubble, and which, yeah, the danger of it all is that you do not look beyond your bubble, and it is very important that we, at least, I think that's why I'm doing this, at least, to get out of the bubble, and in terms of virtually, and then check in with everyone, and that we, as a movement for the rights of Indigenous peoples and the interests of Indigenous peoples, that we make sure that things are still rolling, and also that we make use of, it's not ideal, and we cannot wait until the Perm Forum convenes, or until 2021, when things hopefully are back at normal. And then again, the question is, what is normal post COVID-19? What is normal? So we do have to, we're the role right now, it pushes us towards doing something that we have not done before, in terms of trying to communicate or coordinate in a way that, because the movement, historically, and I've only been in the movement for 19 years now, the movement has been strongest at the international level. It has been. I see Rebecka laughing. I know. Sorry. Yeah, you can see in my hair that's been 19 years. But the movement has been strongest at the international level, and it would be such a shame to see that perish, actually, under these circumstances. Of course, we all hope to be physically at the Perm Forum, or at the MRP, or at the Human Rights Council, or at WIPO, the World Intellectual Property Organization. Sorry for all the acronyms, everyone. Hopefully, at the end of the whole session, that you know all the acronyms by heart. That we should not wait, and this has been my concern. Sorry to go out of this rant or riff with the movement, that we always wait until we're in New York. We always wait until we're in Geneva before we strategize for something. At least most of the regions, or most of the Indigenous peoples. And I know that, for example, Asia is doing a very good job and having preparatory meetings, but they have the infrastructure to do so. If you look at the Pacific, for example, you have all these islands, it's very hard, very difficult to have physical meetings. And then with this COVID-19 pandemic, and we're all in isolation, that it drives us, it forces us to search for ways to be communicative amongst one another. Question then is how do we communicate in a respectful way? How do we communicate with the UN, and how can the UN accept our communications in a respectful way? Because, for example, like I can imagine that like that there's a lot of things happening right now, not only in a negative way in terms of like human rights violations that are still ongoing. We just heard from the Amazon basin in the Amazon, but we also read and hear a lot of positive things about like Mother Earth like regenerating herself, like biodiversity coming back, and like you said, like you can see like in India the sky is cleared and you can see actually beyond 100 meters. So like there needs to be ways actually for us to be able to communicate that in respect to the UN, for them to take it into making sure that it is not just the states talking right now. Like it's just states talking, whereas Indigenous peoples, custodians of the planet for since time immemorial, and biodiversity, the whole thing, that we should be talking as well. And I don't want to say like that we've been. I don't want to point fingers, because that is not my mindset. My mindset in this case is like, what can we do? Like what can we do? And I physically, like people are listening, like what can they do? What can we do? Practically simple to to communicate, not only like within Indigenous peoples or with the United Nations, or like, so what comes into your mind? Rebecka, please.
Yeah, something that's also really important to remember is it's not just the UN and the UN system and the UN agencies that are just providing platforms. It's also that we as UN agencies use the opportunities of these international meetings to, I don't know, like ask for advice from our stakeholders as well. We talk to member states, NGOs, other observers. We talk to Indigenous peoples, because when it comes to it, we are working for our stakeholders, and the UN agencies needs the input from Indigenous peoples. So also what Victor was saying as well, and Sachem as well, like we're it's not only that Indigenous peoples are like the ones who are dependent. We are dependent on your inputs as well, or like the inputs of Indigenous peoples. For example, that's why I have the position that I have as an Indigenous fellow. That's because there was a need at the World Intellectual Property Organization for the inputs of Indigenous peoples in the everyday work. And we are using, when we host the IGC, which is also is an acronym, it's the Intergovernmental Committee on Genetic Resources, Traditional Knowledge, and Folklore, that WIPO then is hosting or facilitating. So we're also using those meetings to really have like proper discussions with all of our stakeholders to see what do we need, what do you need, what do you want, how can we make this better, how can we develop our meetings and our ways of working intersessionally or at our meetings. So we need that as well. And in this time, we need to find a way to really, it's not a one-way street. Like we need to communicate with each other, and like I need, like my division, like we need the inputs of Indigenous peoples to see if we're doing things right, what we should work on, what we should develop in this time of the COVID crisis. Like what do people need as well? So we really do want inputs, and that's also, I'm gonna, like Rochelle, I'm gonna put my email in the comments, because we really do need those inputs, and just knowing that like it's not just UN agencies and that Indigenous peoples are dependent. Like we need the inputs as well.
Appreciate it. No, thanks. I think that Yeah, so I think that's a very good observation that you made. That is that it's not just a one-way street, but it's a two-way street. That these meetings are not just that not just the Indigenous peoples need these meetings, but like UN agencies as well. Thank you so much for that. We're coming to the tail end of this kind of conversation. I think that it's been sorry, before I like round everything up, like any additional thoughts, something that we have not covered yet. Like, what do you want to talk about still? Anything. Tell me anything.
Yeah, I totally agree. I think this is the time to really push forward the message that we don't have to go back to the way it was. We don't have to, this if anything, this pandemic is like staining, almost like an antibody stain. If I'm going to get really scientific, of the things in our society that aren't working. And they're showing us that a lot of the mistakes that we've made that we haven't addressed, that come from, even hundreds of years ago. And I think we need to, hop on those stains and make them even more visible, and show people that we don't have to go back to that. Like, just as a practical example, not even in the, obviously this affects Indigenous peoples, but Indigenous peoples with disabilities and all people with disabilities, we're finding out that they actually don't have to go into work, a lot of them. That's just one example. They can work from home, but there are so many things that we can use this opportunity to show that we can move forward, and Indigenous peoples need to be included in those processes in order to make sure that we move forward in the right ways, to show the world that we can be more sustainable, to highlight the thing that these are things that we've been saying, for hundreds of years, and that, if we were essentially listened to, a lot of people wouldn't be dying right now. We wouldn't be worrying about getting food to people or getting medicine to people that don't have access to it, and that the UN agencies and countries need to get on board with promoting Indigenous sovereignty. And maybe one of the strategies we can talk about is, elucidating how much money it would save if Indigenous peoples, had, our own gardens, we're trading with each other, our own buffalo ranches, in my tribe's case, our pipe, control sovereignty over our own education system, so our children spoke their language, knew their traditional knowledge, knew when to plant food, how to hunt, knew traditional medicines that grew in their territory that would help their elders. How much money the UN and countries would be saving if we had these things in place, and if we had them in place in the future as well, I think is something we need to be looking at in terms of and that, because I'm not sure that what we've been doing and how Indigenous peoples have been supported, it has necessarily been effective. So I think we need total shift in that mentality.
Thanks so much, Victor. Paulo, any thoughts?
I think our talk was, at least from my part, covered a whole bunch of issues. I agree with Victor. And then again, I come back to this idea of agents of change, that I think Indigenous people should, use this idea much more, that, without the active participation of Indigenous peoples in so many processes, in economy, in ways of life, in recovering from the COVID-19, many countries will not succeed in the SDGs, and will not succeed in any other sustainable way of life. Just dropping this coin in the discussion.
Appreciate it. Rebecka, take it home. Any final thoughts, things that you still want to say?
No, I think I'm all good. It was just really interesting to hear all of your inputs, and really good to see in the chat as well, and the comments that I have to read through properly. People had their input. So yeah, again, like, just we're still in the period where there are pretty much like only question marks for most of us. And I look forward to like continuing the discussion, finding new ways of communicating, and then hopefully clearing some things up and coming with some solutions pretty soon. So yeah, that's it. Thanks.
Oh, appreciate it. Thank you so much. Victor, you want to say something?
I was just going to say thank you for moderating this discussion. You've been an amazing moderator, and thank you to Ghazali for
thanks a lot
organizing these discussions.
To be here.
Oh, it's something that I felt that needed to happen, and it's definitely like I hope that people are, and it's already happening, but like people do it more, like having these online conversations. It's while we're still in quarantine bubble, and there's still no end in sight in terms when this whole lockdown thing is going to end, that we need to continue having these discussions. So thank you so much, Victor, Rebecka, Paulo, and Johnson Hawk. He just left. He always leaves. He always leaves all of a sudden. And Rochelle as well. Thank you so much for joining into this conversation. I think in doing this final monologue thing, right? Like what they do in like shows and stuff. Like I don't know, like late night shows. So yeah, thank you so much for your contribution. Everyone else, like in the comments, thank you so much for showing love, showing appreciation, and showing thoughts. Sorry, I missed this question, by the way. That's actually the question was confused. I am confused how you can onwards with the negotiation and process for the legally binding treaty if you have to go through UNGA again. Oh, that's with the BBNJ. So that the deadline was IGC4, and for that, so a couple of weeks ago. So like in order to have a new meeting, it requires a new UNGA resolution or a decision by the General Assembly. So that's why it's happened that way, and the negotiations can still continue. So luckily, it doesn't end at IGC4, which is intergovernmental conference. Sorry, Claire, for only answering the question like almost 1 hour after she asked it. Usually, I'm not that slow. So today we talked about the impacts of COVID-19 in Indigenous and on Indigenous peoples. Sorry, with particularly the international agenda of Indigenous peoples. We heard a lot of concerns about like human rights violations are still occurring. The thought that UN is not reachable, but it is still working. Like we still have to like file our human rights violations, our special, still communicate with the UN. That the meetings are not happening is not only a problem for Indigenous peoples, but also a problem for UN agencies and other and states. Like the forum was supposed to occur in this period. Like so they can check in with Indigenous peoples and ask Indigenous peoples. So the question is, what is the platform now, like for Indigenous peoples as well as the UN, as well as its UN agencies, to reach out to one another while we're still in lockdown? We cannot wait until the UN reconvenes all of their meetings. So what are the platforms out there? the UN is now trying to find some, what we're experiencing is trying to find a new standard, like how do you apply human rights and the rights of these peoples in a time of COVID-19, while in quarantine and while in lockdown. Like how it's trying to figure out the guidelines for states so that states can abide by the human rights still. So one concern is from Indigenous side, like, well, Indigenous peoples are not equally mentioned in the processes, and the wording is not as strong as we want it to be, and that is a indicator for the Indigenous movement, for the international Indigenous movement, to step up and engage with these special procedures and with the UN bodies that are talking about these measures. That how do we want, what do we want them to do, and while still being respectful for the rights of these peoples, and without going into like dependency language, like Victor just now said. There are many more things that we need to that are about that we should talk about. But I hopefully you can continue to conversate in the comments, but have your own meetings on this as well. I think that is very important. Tomorrow we will be talking. So it's like a whole week. Tomorrow we will go on. Continue the conversation. We'll focus on rule of law and human rights. So we'll go more specifically in the national context. The day after tomorrow, we'll talk about the environmental impacts. So we already talked about like the negative impacts, but it's also interesting to talk about the positive impacts of the lockdown. You know, and how can we compile that, collate that in a way that we can bring it to the UN in due time or right now. So that they take that into consideration. The Thursday will be very interesting because then we really talk about, listen very carefully to what Victor is going to say, because he's going to talk about like all about Indigenous medicine. I'm not going to say too much about it, but it's going to be very interesting, and because we will be talking about Indigenous peoples' own mechanisms and own ways of coping and own ways of sorry, I lost that one. Anyway, it's going to be interesting. It's going to be about Indigenous self-protection mechanisms like food sovereignty, and we're going to look at the nation of Hawaii, how they're doing, what a good example they can be, and we're going to look at Indigenous protection mechanisms like. In the Pacific, we have Sasi and Rahui, which it is like a certain area or resource is being locked off or in quarantine for a certain amount of time, so people cannot access it for it to allow it to regenerate. So how can we use that in this particular context, or are we doing it by ourselves, or should we do something about that in that way in the global context? And then the Friday will be also interesting because that's actually we go like hand to hand, as in like we go we're trying to find out GoFundMes and like Indigenous peoples that are asking that they need help, and we're trying to give them advice and guidance on a lot of things. So that will be interesting. And then Saturday, it will be a surprise. It's not on the menu, but it is a surprise. And Victor is he's already laughing. He's going to be participating in that on Saturday. But more on that throughout the week. Thank you so much for tuning in, and thank you again, Paulo, Rebecka, Victor, Rochelle, Hawk, and Johnson. And hopefully see you guys, catch you up tomorrow and throughout the week. Right. Have a great day.
Thank you.
Yeah.
Bye.
Bye, everyone.
Bye.